If you have a sibling who has always been cruel to you, who sabotaged you since childhood and today, as an adult, continues destroying your peace of mind, you need to hear this. It's not your fault. And no, it's not normal sibling rivalry. There's a brutal reality that nobody wants to admit about dysfunctional families. While everyone talks about narcissistic parents, there's a type of silent abuse that happens right under everyone's nose. Narcissistic siblings who torture their own siblings since childhood and who grow up becoming even more dangerous adults. You know what I'm talking about. That sibling who was never happy when you were born, who put you in dangerous situations just for fun, who always managed to convince your parents that you were the problem, who today, as an adult, still manipulates the entire family against you. If you're watching this, you probably spent your whole life questioning your own sanity. Your parents always said it was sibling stuff, that you'd work it out when you grew up. But you grew up, and your sibling just became more sophisticated in their cruelty. Dr. Gabor Maté has always said that the most devastating trauma is the one that happens at home, by the people who should protect us. And when that trauma comes from a sibling, the wound is even deeper, because you never had a day of peace in your own family. What I'm going to tell you will validate everything you've always known, but that nobody ever believed. The first thing you need to understand is that this started long before you were aware of what was happening. Narcissistic siblings don't develop this behavior out of nowhere in adolescence or adulthood. They already showed devastating signs from a very young age. Normal children get curious, sometimes even a little jealous when a little sibling is born, but they soon adapt and even develop protective instincts. Children who later become narcissists react completely differently. They see the baby as an intruder, a thief who came to steal their attention, their territory. I've heard stories of siblings at 2-3 years old trying to hurt newborn babies. I'm not talking about accidents or childhood curiosity. I'm talking about deliberate attempts to cause harm. Accidental pinches, pushes, when nobody was looking, forced crying so the baby would be blamed. As you grew up, the tactics became more elaborate. Your narcissistic sibling learned the art of emotional manipulation before even learning to tie their shoes. They convinced you to do things you knew were wrong, but then, when parents found out, they always had a ready excuse. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen to me. Their cruel genius lies in always having an alternative version of the facts. You got beaten for breaking something they forced you to break. You got scolded for lying when you tried to tell the truth about what really happened. Gradually, you learned that reality didn't matter. What mattered was the version they told, and the worst of all, your parents believed them. Always. Because they had a natural gift for appearing innocent, for victimizing themselves at the right moment, for being the easy child while you became the problematic child. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that children in abusive environments develop hypervigilance as a survival mechanism. You probably became that anxious child, always walking on eggshells, always trying to guess your sibling's mood to avoid the next attack. But there's something even more disturbing about the dynamic between you two that few understand. By the way, what city are you watching from? Leave it in the comments. I want to know where the people who are finally understanding they're not crazy are located. What your narcissistic sibling discovered very early was that real power doesn't come from fighting directly with you. It comes from controlling how others see you. This is called triangulation, and it's one of the most devastating weapons in a narcissist's arsenal. While you were an honest child, trying to tell the truth about what was happening, your sibling was building a network of informants and allies within the family itself. They whispered to your mother, "I'm worried about my sibling, they've been very aggressive with me lately." To your father, "I was just trying to play, but they exploded out of nowhere." Triangulation works because narcissists are masters at studying people. Your sibling knew exactly which buttons to push with each family member. They knew your mother worried about your anxiety, so they turned your anxiety into evidence that you were unstable. They knew your father valued discipline, so they presented themselves as the obedient child while painting you as rebellious. The result? You lived in a reality where your own experiences were constantly invalidated. When you tried to defend yourself, you were called a liar. When you showed emotion about the injustice, you were labeled as problematic. When you isolated yourself to protect yourself, you were accused of being antisocial. Dr. Gabor Maté talks about how complex trauma develops when a child can't trust their own perception of reality. This is exactly what happens when you grow up with a narcissistic sibling. You develop this inner voice that always questions, am I exaggerating? Am I really the problem? But triangulation didn't stop in childhood. As you grew up, your sibling refined their techniques. In adolescence, they probably started spreading rumors about you at school, telling distorted versions of domestic fights to friends, always positioning themselves as the victim of your aggression. And at family gatherings, they dominated conversations, told funny stories where you were always the comic relief, but never in an affectionate way. It was always you being clumsy, you being exaggerated, you being too sensitive. And the cruelest part, they did all this with a smile, because narcissists know that cruelty disguised as joking is the most effective. If you reacted, you were the one who couldn't take it in stride. But there's a specific reason why your parents never saw this, and it has everything to do with something Dr. Gabor Maté identified about dysfunctional family systems. Here's the truth that's going to hurt, but that you need to hear. Your parents knew. On some level, they always knew there was something wrong with the dynamic between you two, but they chose to ignore it because confronting reality would mean admitting they failed as parents. Dysfunctional families operate based on a collective lie, the fantasy that they're normal and functional. Your parents invested so much in this image of the united family that any contrary evidence became an existential threat to them. When you tried to explain what your sibling did, you weren't just reporting a problem. You were threatening to destroy the illusion that kept your family functioning. That's why they reacted with such resistance. Your siblings, you have to get along. This is just a phase. You're exaggerating. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that emotionally immature parents often choose the easiest child to deal with as their favorite, not necessarily the healthiest one. Your narcissistic sibling probably became the golden child, not because they were better, but because they were more skilled at manipulating your parents' emotions. They knew exactly how to be the perfect child when it suited them. They came home with good grades because narcissists know that external performance matters, helped with household chores when there were visitors, said loving things about the family in front of other adults. Meanwhile, you became the scapegoat. All family stress, all unresolved tension, all your parents' frustration was unconsciously dumped on you. When there were problems in the family, somehow they always came back to something you had done or failed to do. This created a perverse dynamic. The more you tried to report your siblings' behavior, the more you confirmed your role as disturber of the peace. Your parents preferred to believe you were dramatic and jealous, rather than face the reality that they had raised one manipulative child and one traumatized one. The truth is that recognizing your siblings' narcissism would force your parents to question their own choices, their own unresolved traumas, their own narcissistic tendencies. It was much easier to convince you that you were imagining things. But what will really shock you is discovering how this family dynamic prepared you for abusive relationships in the future. Here's the most devastating part of having grown up with a narcissistic sibling. You were conditioned from childhood to accept abusive treatment as normal. Your ability to identify red flags was systematically destroyed before you even understood what healthy relationships were. Think about it. Your first experience of brotherly love was with someone who manipulated you, humiliated you, and then convinced you that you deserved that treatment. You learned that love comes with pain, that people close to you can hurt you jokingly, that questioning someone's behavior makes you the problem. Dr. Gabor Maté talks about how attachment trauma creates patterns that repeat in future relationships. When your first model of intimate relationship is abusive, your brain interprets this as normal. You develop an abnormally high tolerance for unacceptable behaviors. How many times have you found yourself in relationships where the person humiliated you in front of others, but then said it was just joking? You were constantly blamed for problems you didn't create. Your emotions were invalidated as exaggerated or dramatic. You walked on eggshells, always trying not to provoke the next explosion. This isn't coincidence. You were trained for this. Your narcissistic sibling was your first teacher in how to accept abuse disguised as normal relationship. Even worse, you probably developed survival strategies that included becoming hypervigilant to others' emotional needs, always trying to anticipate and prevent conflicts. This turned you into a magnet for narcissists because they can sense from afar someone who has been conditioned to prioritize their needs above their own. Your sibling also taught you that love is conditional, that you only deserve gentle treatment when you're being useful, when you're not causing problems, when you're meeting someone else's expectations. This lesson became the foundation of how you relate to romantic partners, friends, even co-workers. The emotional manipulation you suffered at home became your language of love. You learned to interpret triangulation, gaslighting, and invalidation as signs that someone cares enough to correct you. But there's an even more disturbing discovery about how narcissistic siblings operate in adult life. Now that you're an adult, your narcissistic sibling hasn't stopped sabotaging you. They just became more sophisticated, more subtle, more devastatingly effective. The difference is that now the consequences are much more serious. Your career, your relationships, your mental health, even your financial stability. Adult narcissistic siblings are specialists in 3 types of sabotage: social sabotage, family sabotage, and opportunity sabotage. Social sabotage works like this. Your sibling infiltrates your social circles. They're charismatic, funny, seem genuinely interested in people's lives. Slowly, they sow doubts about you. My sibling has always been kind of unstable. They exaggerate in stories. You have to know them well to understand how they work. These aren't direct attacks. They're apparently concerned comments said with the tone of someone who cares. When you confront someone about it, they defend your sibling. They were just worried about you. They talk about you with great affection. Family sabotage is even more cruel. Your sibling positions themselves as the responsible child, the one who takes care of the parents, the one who makes important decisions. They control the flow of information in the family. Your parents receive an edited version of your life, always painted negatively. When you get a new job, they mention to your mother that they're worried because you change jobs too much. When you end a relationship, they whisper about how you never managed to maintain anything. When you're happy, they find a way to associate your happiness with irresponsibility. Dr. Gabor Maté observes that narcissists are masters at controlling narratives. Your sibling became the official storyteller of your family's history, and in that story, they're always the hero, and you're always the problematic character they patiently tolerate. Opportunity sabotage is perhaps the most devastating. Your sibling can directly interfere with your professional or personal opportunities. If you work in the same field, they can spread subtle rumors about your reliability. If you know the same people, they can casually mention your supposed limitations. The most perverse thing is that they do all this while maintaining a facade of loving sibling. If you confront them, they act as if you're paranoid. Why would I do that? You're my sibling, I love you. But there's something even more sinister about how narcissistic siblings manipulate inheritance and family care situations. When parents start aging, Narcissistic siblings reveal their true nature in a more raw and calculating way. They see their parents' vulnerability not as an opportunity to repay the love received, but as the final chance to ensure total control over family resources. Your narcissistic sibling probably already started positioning themselves strategically years before any real need arose. They're the one who visits the parents more, who worries about their future, who better understands their needs. But observe closely. These visits always come accompanied by conversations about wills, powers of attorney, financial decisions. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that narcissists see relationships as transactions. For your sibling, the years of apparent care for your parents are an investment that should yield concrete dividends. They're not caring because they love, they're building a case for when they need to justify why they deserve more of the inheritance. Meanwhile, you probably hesitate to get involved in these conversations because they make you feel uncomfortable. Talking about inheritance while parents are still alive seems morbid, self-interested. This moral hesitation is exactly what your sibling counts on. While you worry about ethics, they're mapping all family assets. When real decision moments arrive, hospitalization, medical treatments, home care, your sibling has already established themselves as the authority. They control medical information. They have the powers of attorney. They decide what's best for the parents. And coincidentally, what's best always preserves the resources they'll eventually inherit. If you question a decision, you're insensitive or don't understand the situation. If you offer financial help, it's because you want to redeem yourself from years of neglect. If you suggest alternative treatments, it's because you don't accept reality. The cruelest part is that they manipulate your parents so that they themselves defend them. Your sibling is taking care of everything. Don't worry. They understand these things better. Let them decide. They know what they're doing. When the moment of inheritance finally arrives, the division was decided long ago. Your sibling not only gets most of the material goods, they also maintain control over the family narrative. They're the child who sacrificed everything for the parents. You're the one who only showed up to complain about the inheritance. But the most devastating aspect of having a narcissistic sibling isn't even financial. It's something much deeper and more lasting. Perhaps the most devastating cruelty of having a narcissistic sibling is the fact that they stole something that can never be recovered. Your own life story. They're the only person in the world who shared your childhood, who should be a witness to your early years, who could validate your memories and experiences. Instead, they became the official forger of your personal biography. When you try to remember childhood moments, there are always two versions: what you remember happening and the official version your sibling tells everyone. And since they were always more charismatic, more convincing, more skilled at manipulating narratives, their version is the one that stays in family memory. Dr. Gabor Maté talks about how narcissists rewrite history to always place themselves as protagonists or victims, never as aggressors. Your sibling transformed every memory of abuse you have into a joke that you didn't know how to take. Every moment of their cruelty became evidence of your excessive sensitivity. Even worse, they stole even your achievements. That time you won an award at school, they tell how they were the one who helped you study. That moment when you showed courage, they rewrite the story so it seems like you were just following their example. Your victories become evidence of the positive influence they had on your life, and your defeats, those are 100% your responsibilities. That time you got hurt because they convinced you to do something dangerous. In their version, you were stubborn and didn't listen to advice. That situation where you were punished for something they did, you didn't know how to explain yourself properly. The result is that you don't have a reliable historian of your own life. The only person who could confirm your childhood memories is the same person who has an interest in distorting them. This creates a particular form of madness. You constantly question whether your own memories are real. When you try to explain to other people what it was like growing up with them, it sounds like paranoia. Because the official version is that you had a normal childhood with normal sibling fights, and that you love each other despite the differences. But there's an even more painful reality about having a narcissistic sibling that few people understand. The deepest form of loneliness isn't being physically alone. It's having gone through traumatic experiences that no one else witnessed, no one else validated, no one else believes really happened. When you have a narcissistic sibling, you live in this loneliness from childhood. Other people who suffered abuse at least have the possibility of finding external validation. A friend might say, "I saw how your father treated you." A teacher might confirm, "I noticed something was wrong at home." But sibling abuse happens in family intimacy, away from witnesses' eyes. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that one of the most fundamental human needs is to have our experiences recognized and validated by others. When this doesn't happen, we develop a deep sense of living in a parallel reality where our pains aren't real because no one saw them. Your narcissistic sibling was an expert at ensuring you were always alone when they attacked you. They had a natural radar for moments when parents were distracted, when other people weren't paying attention, and in the rare moments when someone witnessed something, they had a ready explanation that cleared them. This created a dynamic where you became the only witness to your own traumas, and a traumatized child isn't considered a reliable witness to their own pain, especially when the person who hurt them is loved by the family. In adult life, this loneliness intensifies. When you try to explain to a therapist, a friend, a romantic partner why you avoid family gatherings, why you have anxiety attacks when your sibling calls, why you react exaggeratedly to certain situations, you sound like someone who holds old grudges over childhood nonsense. Society teaches us that blood is thicker than water, that family is sacred, that siblings are gifts for life. When your experience contradicts these cultural narratives, you feel like an alien trying to explain a reality that no one else can see. You spend your whole life carrying secrets that aren't even secrets. They're experiences that simply no one believes or understands, and this isolates you in a way that few types of trauma can do. But there is hope, and there is a way to recover your sanity and your peace. The first thing you need to understand is that recognizing the reality about your narcissistic sibling isn't cruelty, it's self-care. For years, you were conditioned to believe that establishing boundaries is lack of family love, but actually, it's the first step to recovering your mental health. Dr. Gabor Maté teaches that healing begins when we stop denying our reality to accommodate other people's illusions. You no longer need to protect the united family fantasy at the expense of your own sanity. You have the right to name your experience for what it really was: abuse. The first practical step is establishing rigid boundaries. This can mean limited contact, where you control when and how you interact with your sibling. It can mean no contact if the toxicity is too severe. There's no moral obligation to maintain a relationship with someone who consistently harms you, even if that person shares your DNA. Second, stop trying to convince other family members of your reality. This is a battle you'll never win because they have emotional investment in maintaining the current dynamic. Your energy is better invested in building healthy relationships outside your family of origin. Third, seek therapy specialized in family trauma and narcissism. You need someone who understands these dynamics, who validates your experience and helps you undo decades of conditioning to accept abuse. Fourth, recognize that you may have developed survival behaviors that no longer serve you in your adult relationships. Hypervigilance, the need to please, excessive tolerance for unacceptable behaviors. All of this needs to be consciously unlearned. The truth is that many people who grew up with narcissistic siblings discover that when they finally free themselves from this toxic dynamic, their life improves drastically. Relationships become healthier, self-esteem strengthens, anxiety decreases. You deserve relationships where you don't need to walk on eggshells. You deserve chosen family that values you for who you are, not that tolerates you despite who you are. You deserve peace of mind. You deserve to have your experiences validated. You deserve to be loved without conditions. Your healing doesn't depend on your sibling changing. It depends on you finally putting your own mental health first. And that's not selfishness, it's survival.